notice it, but something has been forming inside you. It is not a hero. It is not a monster. It is something harder to describe, something that cannot be placed into a box. People try to label everything, but they cannot label this. That makes it dangerous. You have learned how to exist without needing anyone. Most people cannot. They survive on approval. They want to be noticed, praised, accepted. They fear being alone, but you stood apart. You discovered another way. That makes you a threat to a world built on dependency. You spent too much time in silence. People did not know how to read it. They mistook quiet for emptiness. But silence is not weakness. Silence is not absence. Silence is a weapon. While others shouted, you listened. While they rushed to be seen, you remained still. They drained themselves chasing attention. You gathered strength. They believed the loudest voice wins. But you learned that the one who listens holds the true power. The one who speaks only when it matters shapes the room. You noticed how people reveal themselves, not in what they say but in what they avoid saying, in nervous laughter, in small pauses, in the cracks between their words. They think their words carry truth, but you saw through it. You looked past their stories and into their actions. They try to impress. You watch. They try to explain. You observe. And when they finally show who they are, you already know what to do. You act without noise, without warning, without delay. The strength you carry now came from solitude. Loneliness to them feels like punishment. To you, it was training. It was a battlefield you survived. Nights filled with fear. Hours when your own mind fought against you. You endured all of it. You came out sharper, colder, harder to break. In silence you studied. You watched how people move, how they react, what stirs their pride, what exposes their weakness. You stopped trusting charm. You stopped believing empty words. You learned to see character through patterns, not promises. That knowledge made you difficult to fool, and you built another kind of strength. You learned to decide who enters your space. You no longer chase company to fill a void. You no longer hold on to people who do not want to stay. You know dragging the unwilling destroys you. Fake loyalty is worse than open hate. You do not waste energy on either. Yes, you paid the price for this awareness, but you do not regret it, because nothing feels more suffocating than being surrounded by the wrong people. Now you guard your space like a fortress. The world celebrates exposure. It demands performance. But you learned the opposite lesson, the strength of being unseen. While they beg for recognition, you focus on results. While they crave credit, you focus on impact. They want to be noticed, you want to be remembered. Not for noise, for silence before the strike. Loneliness was not a setback. It was your ground of training. Silence did not mute you. It sharpened you. It did not break you. It shaped you into something they cannot explain. Every decision you make now is your own. You wait for no one. You explain nothing. You move on your path with clarity. And what you hold today is something rare. Independence. Not the kind written on slogans. Real independence. Independence from approval, from validation, from control. They wonder how you became this way. They call it cold. They call it strange. But deep down, they fear it. People think you are always strong. They don't see what it cost you. They don't see the nights you fought with yourself. They don't see the wounds you hid. They only see what you became. They mistake the end result for the whole story. But you know what it took. You learned to keep your battles quiet. You trained yourself not to bleed in public. You carried pain in silence. And in that silence, you found control. You learned how to hold your ground without showing weakness. That is why they can't read you now. Unreadable. That is your advantage. When people can't read you, they fear you. They don't know your plans. They don't know if you are resting, planning, or preparing to strike. That uncertainty is your shield. That silence is your camouflage. While they guess, you calculate. While they react, you anticipate. They invent stories to explain you, but they don't match reality. They label you distant, cold, mysterious. That is easier than facing the truth. And the truth is simple. You stopped playing their game. You stopped giving away your attention. You stopped giving away your energy. You stopped letting people pull you where they wanted you to go. And that's why they fear you. Not because you are cruel, but because you are free. Freedom always has a price. And this is where most people fail. The price is silence. The price is patience. The price is being misunderstood. When you break your silence just to prove yourself, you hand them power. You give them a target. When you feel the need to show you are working, you fall into their trap. That's when ego takes control. And ego is the enemy of strategy. Ego wants recognition. Ego wants attention. Ego wants to show off, but you learn to tame it. You treat ego like a wild animal. You keep it caged. You feed it only enough to survive, never enough to lead. You don't serve your ego anymore. You use it. You burn its fire for fuel, but you never let it drive. And this is where your solitude gave you something greater. Patience. Not empty waiting, not sitting still. Strategic patience. You build in silence. You plan in silence. And you act only when the moment is right. You've seen what happens when people talk too soon. Their ideas die before they're born. But the silent operator waits, then strikes, and nothing can stop it. Time became your weapon. You don't rush. You don't chase. You don't need the world to know what you're doing. While others spend their days posting, shouting, demanding applause, you are constructing something real, something that doesn't need attention to survive. It only needs to be finished. And that's when the shift begins. You rise above the chaos. You stop being pulled into arguments. You stop reacting to insults. You stop defending your name to people who don't matter. Because you understand now, the one who fights every battle becomes a prisoner of those battles. The one who ignores what doesn't matter becomes untouchable. This is how solitude turns into your base. You are not isolated. You are positioned. Like a sniper with a clear view. You reveal yourself only when the shot is certain. You choose when to appear. You choose when to retreat. You choose when to let them think they won, only to show later they never had a chance. It is not cowardice. It is not hiding. It is calculation. True power is not shown in constant display. It is shown in knowing when to move and when not to. If you are always on display, you become predictable. If you always assert power, you drain it. But if you hold it back, if you strike only when needed, your power multiplies. They exhaust themselves chasing relevance every day. But by the time they notice you, it's too late. You're already ahead. Most people act because they feel pressure. They move fast because silence makes them nervous. They talk too much because they can't sit with stillness. Their choices are not planned. They are reactions. You used to be like them, but not anymore. You don't move with emotion. You move with strategy. You learn the difference between reacting and acting. Reactions are rushed. They are noisy. They come from fear. Action is different. Action is slow, deliberate, and chosen. You don't follow their rhythm. You follow your own. That is the line between being manipulated and being in control. You no longer live on their time. You live on your time. This gave you detachment. The day you stopped needing fast results was the day you became harder to control. Compliments don't move you. Insults don't move you. Promises and threats mean nothing. You still feel, but feelings don't rule your choices. You can respond, but you don't let emotions steer you. Detachment does not make you cold. It makes you immune. With that immunity, you gained another kind of strength. You need less validation, less noise, less distraction. You began to clear space inside yourself, like removing clutter from a room. You kept only what mattered. You stripped away doubts, illusions, and false needs. What remained was solid. And from that solid ground, every move you make has more weight. This clarity helped you see people differently too. Without the fog of need, you noticed their motives. You saw who flatters to get something and who means it. You saw who lies and who fears being caught. You saw who hides intentions and who stands with honesty. You no longer needed to guess. You could tell. That kind of vision cannot be unlearned. Your solitude turned into a laboratory. You didn't just sit in silence. You used it to study yourself. You looked at your flaws with honesty. You saw your fears and failures as lessons. You removed habits that weakened you. You stopped clinging to parts of yourself that once begged for approval. You built a new structure from within, quietly, step by step, and no one saw it. But the structure is unshakable now. Most people never understand this process because they need an audience. They need eyes on them to feel real. They measure their worth by being seen. But you evolved past that. You can sit in an empty room and feel whole. You no longer need witnesses to feel valid. You exist, and that is enough. You know the world doesn't reward noise. It rewards precision, and that's what you are building. When your work finally appears, it will need no introduction. It will be undeniable. That is the danger for others, not because you seek to dominate, but because your presence will remind them of what they could be if only they had the courage. Your existence becomes a mirror, and many cannot stand what they see in it. They see the gap between their potential and their reality, and that unsettles them more than anything you could say. You crossed the point of no return already. You burned the bridge back to comfort, back to mediocrity, back to the herd. You no longer belong to the rules they follow. You no longer fit into the rituals they live by. You left the hunger for likes and applause behind. You orbit no one's expectations. You became your own axis. They can't trap you with praise or guilt. You left their marketplace of approval, and that freedom makes you dangerous. Your solitude, once seen as weakness, became your advantage. You learned that not everyone deserves access to you. You control what people know. You control what people see. And when they cannot predict your presence, your value rises. Scarcity always increases significance. They try to be everywhere, chasing every conversation, every trend, but their constant exposure makes them disposable. You do the opposite. You are rare, you are measured, and when you appear, the weight is undeniable. That is the law of scarcity. It does not just apply to things, it applies to people. When you are not always available, when you are not always visible, you become harder to forget. People wonder where you are. They wonder what you are doing. They speculate. They try to guess your next step. That mystery becomes its own form of strength. Mystery is both protection and power. It shields you from intrusion. It draws attention without effort. It forces others to think about you even when you say nothing. They try to map your thoughts. They try to decode your strategy, but they fail because you became unreadable by design. Mystery dies the moment you explain yourself, so you refuse to explain. You refuse to justify. You refuse to hand over pieces of yourself to people who have not earned it. Even those close to you must earn access. Loyalty itself must be tested. When you choose to reveal something, it is by choice, not by pressure. It is controlled, not forced. You know every explanation is a key, and a key in the wrong hands can open doors you never wanted touched. That is why you speak less. That is why you share less. Silence is no longer absence. It is control. This silence did not isolate you. It elevated you. You began to see the whole field like a strategist above the chaos. Not because you fear the fight, but because you want to understand the terrain before you step in. From that view, you plan each move with precision. Every word, every silence, every step. You no longer play for small victories, you play for the war. And in war, the strongest position is not being everywhere. It is being unseen until it is too late. You learned that true force is not loud. It is quiet until the right moment. Like a storm the sky forgets about until it breaks without warning. You let people grow used to your absence. You let them think you faded, and then you strike. Not out of rage, not out of ego, but because the moment is ready. The silence has done its work. The field is unguarded, and you take what was always yours to take. This is how you reshaped your power, not through noise, but through timing. Timing is everything. You don't move by the clock others obey. You don't chase deadlines they panic over. You mastered the slow burn. You mastered the long game. You learned patience cold enough to break those who depend on momentum. And that is why you keep moving ahead while others tire themselves out. They mistake your silence for retreat, but they never see the storm building. And when it breaks, nothing stops you. Your silence turned your mind into more than just a place for thoughts. It became an intelligent system. You stopped watching people in a casual way. You started studying them. You collected patterns. You stored small details. You noticed habits others ignored. You connected threads no one else could see. While most people chased single moments, you stacked advantages. While others scrambled under pressure, you already had a plan tested 100 times in solitude. That difference makes you untouchable. You no longer need to move fast. Speed is not your goal. Precision is. You stopped wasting energy on noise. You let time work for you. To most people, time is pressure. To you, time is leverage. The impatient drown in it. You ride it with calm calculation. You discovered that time is not the enemy. Time exposes weakness. It reveals the fake. It collapses false structures. And it strengthens what is solid. Because of your solitude, you made yourself solid. This gave you a new kind of power. The power to ignore. You no longer chase every opportunity. You no longer fight every battle. You stopped running after every opening that looked bright on the surface. You understood that some battles are traps. They are emotional ambushes dressed as victories. Winning them costs more than losing ever would. So you walk away, not from fear, from clarity. The ability to walk away without a scar is dominance most people never see. The enemy who cannot tempt you cannot control you. This selective detachment reshaped you from the inside. You stopped treating power like a reward. You started treating it like a tool, cold, precise, functional. You don't need to prove you are powerful. You only use power when it serves the mission. You don't let attention intoxicate you. You don't let small wins distract you. You measure everything by one question. Does this serve the mission? If the answer is no, you let it pass. This shift gave you freedom from chance. You are no longer moved by mood, luck, or momentum. Everything comes from preparation, and you prepared in the place no one dares to enter, in silence, in shadows, in hours where no one clapped for you, no one watched you, and no one gave you comfort. That is where the strongest version of you was made. That is where you built the part of yourself that no one can break. Now you are something harder to define. To some, you are an enigma. To others, a silent threat. To others still, a ghost who moves past chaos without being touched by it. But none of these labels are what you seek. You never set out to be mysterious. You never wanted to be feared. You wanted clarity. You wanted precision. You wanted peace through discipline. And that desire itself is what made you unpredictable. You stopped playing for attention. You stopped playing for applause. You started shaping the field itself. You no longer fight inside the game. You design the board where the game takes place. That is the discipline of power, not to dominate with constant noise, but to shift the terrain so that your presence itself is the deciding factor. That is what you became, an architect of outcome. Others wait for permission, but you don't. You build doors where none exist, and you choose when they open. There is a level most never reach. It is not enough to master silence. It is not enough to refine patience. The highest level is disappearing from yourself. This means you stop negotiating with your emotions. You stop debating with your past. You stop waiting for permission from your own fear. You no longer react, not even inside your head. You become both the observer and the decision maker. You see life not as something you follow, but as something you design. And in this design, you are both the player and the piece. At this stage, mastery does not need to be shown. It is lived. You don't chase opportunities. You generate them. You don't wait for doors to open. You build the door yourself, and you decide when it opens. You stop looking for signs to act. You create the sign. You stop hoping for timing to align. You shape the timing. That is what separates you from most. They wait for the world to give them a moment. You create your own. This is the transformation solitude gave you. It gave you the ability to restructure how you move. You no longer belong to outside rhythms. You no longer follow the clock that pushes everyone else. You became your own rhythm. You became your own measure of progress. And when you live this way, the world cannot pull you back into its patterns. They cannot tempt you with false rewards. They cannot scare you with false losses. They cannot push you into reaction because you are no longer bound to reaction. The truth is, you never set out to be the villain or the mastermind. You never wanted a role others could define. What you wanted was simple: clarity, peace, precision. But that alone makes you difficult to understand. People who need approval cannot grasp someone who does not. People who chase recognition cannot explain someone who avoids it. Your discipline itself becomes a mystery, and mystery unsettles them more than noise ever could. In a world obsessed with being seen, you build in silence. In a world that mistakes noise for strength, you practice quiet execution, and that alone is enough to challenge everyone around you, because you are a reminder of what they fear to become. They know they could break free of their chains, but they lack the courage. And when they see you, they see the proof that it can be done. That reflection unsettles them. They may call you cold, they may call you distant, but what they really see is their own weakness reflected back. By now, you burned the bridge to comfort. You left mediocrity behind. You left the rituals of belonging behind. You left the hunger for applause behind. You no longer orbit their expectations. You became your own axis. They can't lure you with flattery. They can't trap you with guilt. You no longer sell yourself for inclusion. You no longer trade pieces of your identity for temporary comfort. That alone makes you unclassifiable. It makes you rare. Your solitude, once treated as a flaw, became your greatest edge. You control access to yourself. You control who gets your time, your words, your attention, and when people cannot predict your presence, they value it more. Scarcity increases worth. They spread themselves thin, trying to be everywhere, but overexposure makes them forgettable. You do the opposite. You stay rare, you stay measured, and when you do appear, everything shifts. They try to fill the world with their presence. You let absence build power, and when you arrive, everything changes. Mystery became both your shield and your weapon. It protects you from being read, and it pulls others toward you without effort. They try to map your intentions, but they fail. They try to predict your next step, but they can't. That confusion alone creates power. You learned that the moment you explain yourself, mystery dies. That is why you don't explain. You don't justify. You don't open doors inside yourself for people who haven't earned the right. Even the closest people must prove loyalty before you reveal anything. And when you do choose to reveal, it is deliberate. Not from fear, not from pressure, but from choice and control. This discipline reshaped the way you move. You realized every explanation is a gift of power. A single detail can become a weapon in the wrong hands. And so you became careful. You stopped giving out keys that opened rooms you wanted locked. Instead, you let silence speak for you. Silence forced others to think. Silence made them wonder. Silence kept them unsettled. And that uncertainty increased your strength. They could only guess, and guessing always leaves them weak. In this state, solitude stopped being isolation. It became elevation. You now see the whole battlefield. You no longer run into fights blind. You study the terrain first. You decide which fights are worth energy and which are nothing but traps. You don't play for small victories. You don't waste energy proving points. You wait for the moments that matter, the ones that decide everything. And when that moment comes, you strike with precision. No wasted motion, no noise, just outcome. This changed the way you view power itself. Power is not constant display. Power is not shouting louder than everyone else. True power is the control of timing. It is the control of presence. If you are always visible, you are predictable. If you are always asserting yourself, you are draining yourself. The strongest force is the one held back until it is needed most. That is when it multiplies, and that is why you are already ahead, while others exhaust themselves staying relevant. You learn to let absence work for you. You let people get used to you being silent. You let them relax and believe you are gone, and then you return, not with noise, but with results. The strike they never saw coming is the one that ends the game. It is not about hiding. It is not about fear. It is calculation. It is patience turned into strategy. And it is the reason your presence, though rare, carries weight every time. Now your very existence disturbs others, not because you attack them, but because you remind them of their own chains. You show them what it looks like to move without needing approval. You show them what it looks like to hold power without flaunting it. And that reflection is something many cannot handle. They see in you what they fear they will never reach. And that fear itself becomes your silent advantage. They think silence means weakness, but silence is control. And when you choose to speak, every word lands like thunder. At this stage, solitude is no longer a condition. It is your foundation. You don't see it as empty or heavy. You see it as a command center. From here, you design your movements with precision. You no longer ask if you belong in the game. You understand that you shape the game itself. Others follow the board they are given. You build the board, you place the pieces, and you decide how they move. That is the difference between being caught inside noise and being the one who directs it from above. You learned that the most powerful position is not to be everywhere. It is to be unseen until it matters. When you are always present, people stop noticing you. When you are always talking, your words lose weight. But when you are rare, when you are silent, your presence grows. People listen because they don't know when they will hear you again. They notice because you appear only when there is something worth noticing. That is how scarcity and timing merge into strength. This way of moving makes you untouchable. While others rush into every battle, you step back. You understand that fighting everything weakens you. You don't waste time defending yourself against every small voice. You don't need to prove your name. You don't need to answer every insult. You realized long ago that defending everything drains the strength needed for what really matters. You are not here to win arguments. You are here to win the war. And wars are not won with noise. They are won with patience, focus, and precision. Your silence taught you discipline. You don't let your emotions control your timing. You don't let your ego demand attention. You don't let your fear rush you forward. Instead, you hold back, you prepare, you wait for the right moment. And when it comes, you move in ways no one can stop. People think strength is about always pushing, always showing force. But you discovered strength is about knowing when not to move, when not to speak, when not to reveal. And that kind of restraint is rare. Through this path, you also built something deeper. You built clarity inside yourself. You no longer argue with your past. You no longer beg for approval. You no longer depend on outside voices to confirm your value. You stripped away what was weak. You burned the need to be seen. And from that sacrifice, you built control. Control over your time. Control over your energy. Control over your attention. These are the things most people give away without thought. You guard them like treasure. That is why you are different. Now you live by a rule few understand. You don't need everyone to see you. You don't need to be everywhere. You don't even need to be understood. What you need is precision. What you need is discipline. And what you need is peace on your own terms. That is why you are unreadable. That is why you are free. And that is why you are dangerous. You stopped chasing recognition. You started shaping destiny. And when you appear, they realize too late. The plan was yours. If this message spoke to you, don't stop here. Subscribe for more. There are more videos waiting on this channel. Watch them.